In the grand architecture of galactic history, few moments stand as stark and devastating as the execution of Order 66. It arrived not with dramatic fanfare or warning klaxons, but with a simple transmission. A single command uttered by an elderly man in a hooded robe, his voice carrying across countless star systems through military communication channels. Within moments, an army of millions turned their weapons on the very people they had fought beside for 3 years. Friends became executioners. Brothers in arms became instruments of genocide. The guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy were cut down by those they trusted most. But Order 66 was not born in a moment. Its roots stretched back decades, planted by patient hands in the shadows of Republic politics. It grew in secret, nourished by manipulation and foresight, by the twisted wisdom of ancient enemies who had waited 1,000 years for their revenge. To understand Order 66, you must first understand that it was not merely a military directive or a tragic accident of war. It was the culmination of the Sith's grandest design, a masterwork of deception that required decades to arrange and only moments to execute. The story begins not with evil, but with fear. Not with a Sith Lord, but with a Jedi Master who saw too much of the future for his own peace of mind. His name was Sidious, and though few would remember him by the time his vision came to pass, his actions would reshape the galaxy in ways he could never have imagined. He stood at the nexus point, where good intentions and dark designs intersected, where the line between salvation and damnation blurred into irrelevance. The galaxy in those years before the Clone Wars seemed stable on its surface. The Republic had stood for 1,000 generations, its democratic institutions weathered and reliable. The Jedi Order served as peacekeepers and diplomats, their connection to the Force allowing them to sense disturbances and maintain balance. The Sith, ancient enemies of the Jedi, were believed extinct for a millennium, destroyed in wars that had become legend. Peace, it seemed, was not merely hopeful thinking, but reasonable expectation. Yet beneath this veneer of stability, currents moved in the darkness. The Sith had not perished. They had simply learned patience. For 1,000 years, they followed the rule of two, their existence reduced to a master and an apprentice, each generation growing stronger in secret while a galaxy forgot they had ever existed. They plotted and schemed, infiltrated and corrupted, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment would come not through open warfare, as their predecessors had attempted, but through the Republic's own mechanisms turned against itself. The Jedi, for all their wisdom and power, had grown comfortable in their role. They served the Republic faithfully, but that very service had created blind spots in their perception. They were warriors who had known peace for so long that the shape of war had become unfamiliar. They were guardians who had forgotten what they were guarding against. Most critically, they had come to believe that the Force would warn them of any true danger, never suspected that the dark side itself could cloud their vision. This was the galaxy into which Sidious cast his troubling prophecies, and into which Darth Sidious would plant the seeds of the Jedi's destruction. Order 66 was not merely about killing Jedi. It was about using the Republic's own military, created to defend democracy, as the instrument of its transformation into tyranny. It was about corrupting the bonds of brotherhood that had formed between Jedi and their clone soldiers. It was about ensuring that when the Jedi fell, they would fall confused and disbelieving, unable to comprehend how those they trusted most could turn on them so completely. The tragedy of Order 66 is multi-layered. There is the obvious tragedy of the Jedi themselves, an entire order destroyed in an afternoon, their temples burned, and their younglings slaughtered. There is the tragedy of the clone troopers, robbed of their free will by organic control chips embedded in their brains, forced to murder friends while conscious but helpless to resist. There is the tragedy of the Republic itself, a democracy that lasted 1,000 generations, ending with thunderous applause as it transformed into an empire. And there is the personal tragedy of individuals, of masters and apprentices, of soldiers and commanders, of relationships built over years of shared struggle, destroyed in seconds of enforced betrayal. To understand how such a catastrophe could occur, we must trace its timeline from the beginning. We must examine how a Jedi's vision led to the creation of an army, how that army was corrupted before it ever saw battle, how 3 years of war forged bonds that made the betrayal all the more devastating, how a single command could activate programming that overwhelmed individuality and free will, how the galaxy's guardians fell while their greatest champion transformed into their destroyer, and how the survivors carried forward, marked forever by the knowledge of what had been lost. This is the entire timeline of Order 66, from the first seeds planted years before the Clone Wars to the long purge that followed. It is a story of manipulation and betrayal, of prophecy fulfilled in the worst possible way, of an organization that believed itself invincible, learning too late that their greatest weakness was the trust they placed in others. It begins with one Jedi who saw too much and ends with an empire built on the graves of 10,000 guardians of peace. The vision of Sifo Dyas. Before the Clone Wars, before the rise of the Empire, before Order 66 became a reality burned into galactic history, there was Sifo Dyas. He was a human Jedi master from the Cassandran worlds of Minashi, gifted with an ability both precious and terrible. Sifo Dyas could see the future, not in vague impressions or symbolic dreams, but in vivid, overwhelming visions that came unbidden and uncontrolled. Where other Jedi might catch glimpses of possible futures, gentle warnings from the Force about paths to avoid, Sifo Dyas experienced prophecy as an assault on his consciousness. The Force showed him a galaxy consumed by war. He saw star systems burning, fleets clashing in the darkness of space, worlds reduced to battlegrounds. He saw the Republic, that 1,000-generation democracy, teetering on the edge of collapse. He saw armies marching, lives lost by the billions, civilization itself threatened by forces that sought to tear it apart. These visions were not abstract possibilities to Sifo Dyas. They were certainties, futures he could see as clearly as others saw the present. The weight of this knowledge, the burden of seeing disaster approaching while others remained blind, slowly began to consume him. Sifo Dyas had earned his place on the Jedi High Council, the governing body of the Order, through years of dedicated service and demonstrated wisdom. He sat among the most powerful and respected Jedi in the galaxy, figures like Yoda and Mace Windu, masters who had guided the Order for decades. But his visions set him apart. While the council debated philosophical questions and mediated disputes, Sifo Dyas saw the future burning. While they discussed the Jedi's role as peacekeepers, he knew that peace would not last. He brought his concerns to the council repeatedly. The Republic needed to prepare for war, he argued. They needed a military force, an army that could defend against the threats he foresaw. The Jedi Order, for all their power, numbered only around 10,000. If the conflict he envisioned came to pass, 10,000 warriors, no matter how skilled, could not defend a republic spanning thousands of worlds. They needed soldiers, millions of them, trained and ready to respond to the crisis he knew was coming. The council rejected his proposals. Their reasoning was sound from their perspective. The Jedi were peacekeepers, not warmongers. The Republic had functioned without a stand-in army for 1,000 years, relying on local security forces and Jedi intervention to resolve disputes. To suddenly militarize would send a message of aggression, might even provoke the very conflicts Sidious feared. More fundamentally, his visions troubled them. The future, they reminded him, was always in motion. What he saw was possibility, not certainty. Acting on fear of what might be could create the very future one sought to prevent. Master Yoda, perhaps the wisest of the council, expressed particular concern. He did not doubt that Sidious had seen something real. The Force did grant visions, and some Jedi were more gifted with foresight than others. But acting rashly on such visions was dangerous. The dark side clouded everything, Yoda warned. What Sidious interpreted as inevitable war might be something else entirely, its meaning obscured by the very thing he feared. Patience and caution were required, not the dramatic action Sidious advocated. Mace Windu took a harder line. He worried that Sidious was becoming obsessed with his visions, that the fear they generated was leading him down a dangerous path. Fear, Yoda had taught generations of Jedi, was the path to the dark side. Fear led to anger, anger to hate, hate to suffering. Sidious's insistence that the Republic arm itself for war, his growing desperation to make the Council act on his prophecies, suggested that his fear was consuming him. This could not be allowed to spread through the Order or influence Republic policy. The breaking point came in the period around the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo. Sidious had grown increasingly agitated, his warnings more urgent, his frustration with the Council's inaction more visible. His fellow Council members tried to counsel patience, to help him find peace despite his visions. But Sidious could not find peace. How could he rest knowing what was coming? How could he remain passive when he saw clearly what needed to be done? The weight of his foresight, the burden of knowledge that others would not accept, drove him to breaking point. The Jedi Council made a decision that seemed wise at the time, but would have catastrophic consequences. They removed Sidious from the Council. It was meant, perhaps, as a kindness. Freed from the responsibilities of Council membership, he could focus on meditation and healing, could work to find balance despite the troubling visions that plagued him. They hoped that with time and distance, he might gain perspective on his fears, might come to understand that his visions were warnings to be carefully considered, not commands to be immediately obeyed. Instead, removal from the Council freed Sidious to act on his convictions without oversight. If the Jedi Order would not prepare for the war he knew was coming, he would do it himself. He would take action, create the army the Republic needed, ensure that when the conflict arrived, there would be defenders ready to stand against it. The fact that he would have to do this in secret without the Council's knowledge or approval, troubled him. But the alternative, doing nothing while a future he had foreseen came to pass, was unacceptable. Sifo-Dyas knew of the Kaminoans, a species renowned as the galaxy's finest cloners. On the water world of Kamino, beyond the Outer Rim, they had perfected the science of genetic replication. They could create armies from a single genetic template, producing soldiers by the millions, all with the same physical capabilities, the same training responsiveness, the same fundamental characteristics. It was the perfect solution to the Republic's defensive needs. A clone army could be produced relatively quickly, trained to military perfection, and deployed wherever the Republic needed protection. There was, of course, the question of authority and payment. Sifo-Dyas was a Jedi Master, but he no longer sat on the Council. He had no official standing to commission an army on behalf of the Republic. The Galactic Senate had not authorized such a creation, knew nothing of his plans, and the cost would be astronomical. Creating millions of clone soldiers, providing them with weapons and armor and ships, training them in military tactics, maintaining the facilities required to produce and sustain such a force, all of this required resources far beyond what a single Jedi could provide. But Sifo-Dyas was determined, and desperation made him bold. He contacted Prime Minister Lama Su of Kamino directly, representing himself as acting on behalf of both the Jedi Council and the Galactic Senate. It was a deception, but one he felt was necessary and justified. He was acting in the Republic's best interests, preparing for a threat that would otherwise destroy them. Surely when the war came and the army he had commissioned saved countless lives, his deception would be forgiven, even praised, as visionary action. The Kaminoans, excellent technicians but politically naive, accepted his word. They had no reason to doubt that a Jedi Master would be authorized to commission an army. They entered into negotiations, discussing specifications for the clone soldiers. How many would be needed? What sort of training would they receive? What template should be used for the genetic material? Sifo-Dyas worked with them to design an army that could defend the Republic against the threats he had foreseen. For the genetic template, the Kaminoans would later select Jango Fett, a Mandalorian bounty hunter renowned for his combat skills. But Sifo-Dyas also insisted on including behavioral modification biochips in the clones. These organic control chips would be implanted into each clone's brain during the development process. Their stated purpose was to ensure that the clones could respond appropriately to orders, to prevent the kind of independent thinking that might lead to mutiny or disorder. More specifically, Sifo-Dyas intended the chips as a safeguard against rogue Jedi. He had seen in his visions that the conflict to come might involve Force users. What if a Jedi fell to the dark side and attempted to take control of the clone army? What if a Jedi general issued commands that contradicted the Republic's interests? The behavioral modification chips could serve as a failsafe, allowing Republic leadership to override dangerous orders and ensure the clones remained loyal to democratic authority, rather than to individual commanders. It was a reasonable precaution from Sifo-Dyas' perspective. He was creating an army to defend the Republic, and he wanted to ensure that army could never be turned against the very government it was meant to protect. The inhibitor chips seemed like responsible planning, a way to maintain civilian control. over military force. He could not have known, could never have imagined how these chips would be corrupted, how the safeguard he intended to protect Jedi from rogue individuals would become the mechanism for the entire Order's destruction. With the basics of the agreement in place, Sidious returned to his duties as a Jedi, perhaps believing that he had done what was necessary, that when war came, the Republic would have the defenders it needed. He could not have known that his actions had been observed. He could not have known that powerful eyes in the shadows had noticed his secret mission to Kamino. And he could not have known that his vision of the future, his desperate attempt to prevent catastrophe, would become the very instrument by which catastrophe would be achieved. The Sith had been watching. They had waited 1,000 years for their revenge, and they were very, very patient. When Sidious created an army for the Republic, he had unknowingly handed the Sith the perfect weapon. All they needed to do was take it. The Sith take control. Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, had infiltrated the highest levels of Republic government under the identity of Senator and later Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine. He was a master of deception, able to stand before the Jedi Council and smile while the dark side roiled within him, his true nature hidden behind layers of political charm and carefully constructed normalcy. For years, he had maneuvered pieces into position, preparing for the day when the Sith would emerge from hiding and claim dominion over the galaxy. The discovery of Sidious' secret clone army was not part of his original design, but Sidious recognized opportunity when he saw it. He learned of the Kaminoan project through his apprentice, Count Dooku, who had once been a Jedi master named Dooku of Sereno. Dooku had left the Jedi Order years earlier, disillusioned with what he saw as the Order's subservience to a corrupt republic. He had returned to his home world of Sereno, claimed his family's title and wealth, and privately embraced the dark side teachings of Darth Sidious, who gave him the Sith name Darth Tyrannus. Dooku maintained connections within the Jedi Order and Republic government, intelligence networks that allowed him to learn things that should have remained secret. When Dooku informed his master of Sidious' actions, Sidious immediately understood the potential. Here was a clone army, millions of soldiers being created in secret, ostensibly for the Republic, but without official authorization. An army that could be used to start the war Sidious had been engineering, the conflict that would give him emergency powers and allow him to reshape the Republic into an empire. An army that, if properly controlled, could serve the Sith's purposes instead of the Jedi's protection. But Sidious himself was a problem. He had commissioned the army, maintained the relationship with the Kaminoans, and would surely interfere if he discovered the Sith's involvement. Moreover, his visions might allow him to glimpse Sidious' true plans, to see the danger before it was too late to prevent. The Jedi Master had to be eliminated, and his death had to appear unconnected to the Clone Army project. It needed to seem like an accident, a tragic loss that would not raise suspicions or prompt investigations that might uncover the Kaminoan operation prematurely. Sidious ordered Dooku to arrange Sidious' assassination. The timing was perfect. Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum, the Republic leader whom Sidious was working to undermine and replace, had requested that Sidious undertake a secret diplomatic mission. The Jedi Master was to travel to Obadiah and negotiate with the Pike Syndicate, a criminal organization that controlled spice trade routes. The mission was classified, with only a handful of people aware of Sifo-Dyas's destination or purpose. Dooku, operating under his Sith identity of Darth Tyrannus, contacted the Pike Syndicate and offered them a contract. They were to shoot down Sifo-Dyas's shuttle over Obadiah's moon, killing the Jedi and his pilot. In return, they would be paid handsomely and gain the Count's favor, useful for a criminal organization that might need political protection in the future. The Pikes, practical business people, accepted the contract. They had no particular animosity toward Sifo-Dyas, but business was business. Sifo-Dyas departed for Obadiah accompanied by Silman, Chancellor Valorum's personal aide, who had helped arrange the secret negotiations. Their shuttle approached Obadiah's moon, the pilot guiding them toward their destination, unaware that Pike ships waited in ambush. The attack came suddenly. The Pikes opened fire, their weapons tearing through the shuttle's shields and hull. The pilot died instantly. The shuttle, critically damaged, plummeted toward the moon's surface. The crash was catastrophic. The impact killed Sifo-Dyas immediately, his body broken by forces that not even Jedi powers could resist. His connection to the Force, that gift of foresight that had defined so much of his life, could not save him from this death. Perhaps he had even foreseen it, seen his own end approaching in visions that showed him dying alone on a barren moon. But if he had chosen to go anyway, driven by duty or fate or the simple inability to change what the future held. Silman miraculously survived the crash. He was injured, trapped in the wreckage, but alive. The Pikes recovered both bodies, not immediately certain if Silman would live or die. They contacted Dooku to report the mission's success. The Count came personally to Obadiah to retrieve Sifo-Dyas's body and to tie up loose ends. He took the Jedi Master's lightsaber, that elegant weapon that was the symbol of a Jedi's identity and connection to the Force. He would later bring Sifo-Dyas's corpse to Felucia, where he staged the scene to make it appear the Jedi had died. In the local conflict there, a tragedy, but not a suspicious one. Silman, delirious from his injuries, was kept prisoner by the Pikes on Obadiah. They told Dooku the aide had died, but they kept him alive, thinking he might be useful leverage in the future. Silman would remain their captive for years, a forgotten witness to Sifo-Dyas's murder. His knowledge of what had truly happened lost to the shadows of a criminal syndicate's prisons. With Sifo-Dyas dead, Dooku assumed control of the Clone Army project. The Kaminoans knew him as Tyrannus, the man who had recruited their genetic template, Jango Fett. They had no idea he was a Sith Lord or that he had murdered the Jedi who had originally commissioned their work. Dooku presented himself as Sifo-Dyas's associate, someone authorized to continue overseeing the project now that the Jedi Master had died. The Kaminoans, focused on the technical challenges of their work and trusting that payment would continue, asked few questions. Dooku brought Jango Fett into the project as the genetic template for the Clone Army. Fett was a Mandalorian bounty hunter, one of the most skilled warriors in the galaxy. He had no particular loyalty to the Republic or animosity toward the Jedi, but he recognized a profitable opportunity when he saw one. In return for his genetic material and his assistance in training the first generation of clones, he would receive an enormous payment and one additional request: an unaltered clone for himself, a son he could raise as his own. The Kaminoans agreed, and Boba Fett was created, genetically identical to Jango, but allowed to age naturally, rather than at the accelerated rate used for the soldiers. The most critical part of the Sith's appropriation of the clone army came in the modification of the behavioral inhibitor chips. Sidious had intended these as safeguards against rogue Jedi, emergency protocols that could prevent individual Force users from corrupting the clones. Dooku, on Sidious instructions, retooled the chips into something far more sinister. They programmed a new protocol into the chips, a single command that would override everything else in a clone's mind. Order 66 was one of 150 contingency orders that clone officers would be trained to recognize. Most of these orders were legitimate military protocols, procedures for a succession of command, responses to different types of threats, protocols for dealing with various emergencies. But Order 66 was different. When activated, it would designate all Jedi as traitors to the Republic, enemies to be executed immediately without question or hesitation. The chips would enforce this order absolutely. When Order 66 was issued, the behavioral modification biochips would activate, flooding the clone's brain with false certainty that the Jedi had betrayed them, that their generals and commanders were enemies who needed to be destroyed. Any personal loyalty, any friendship or respect that had developed between Jedi and their clone soldiers would be overridden. The clones would retain full awareness of what they were doing, but would be unable to resist the compulsion. Some part of them might scream in horror at what they were being forced to do, but their bodies would obey the chip's programming regardless. The Kaminoans themselves believed the chips still served Sidious' original purpose. Prime Minister Lama Su and Chief Medical Scientist Nala Se seemed genuinely convinced that the behavioral inhibitors were simply to control aggression and ensure obedience to legitimate authority. They had no idea that the chips had been weaponized, turned into the mechanism for the greatest act of betrayal in galactic history. Whether they were naive, willfully ignorant, or simply focused so completely on the technical aspects of their work that they never questioned the broader implications, the result was the same. They created millions of clone soldiers with organic control chips in their brains, chips that could turn them into unwilling assassins with a single command. Dooku also took steps to ensure the Jedi would not discover the clone army until the appropriate time. He used his knowledge of the Jedi Temple, gained during his decades as a Jedi Master, to access the Jedi archives. There, he erased Kamino from the star charts, removing any record of the planet's existence from the Jedi's vast database of astronomical information. He also deleted information on several other systems, making it appear that the data had been corrupted or lost rather than specifically targeted. The deletion was not complete. Hard copies of information about Kamino existed in various places, and individuals who had traveled there personally would remember its location. But it made the planet much harder to find for anyone who went looking. If a Jedi tried to locate Kamino in the archives, they would find nothing. The planet would appear to simply not exist, a blank spot on the map. Only someone who already knew where to look, who had reason to search for Kamino specifically, would be able to find it. With these pieces in place, the Sith sat back and waited. Their army was being built, millions of perfect soldiers growing in the cloning facilities of Camino. The behavioral inhibitor chips were embedded in every clone's brain, ready to activate when the time came. The Jedi remained ignorant of the Army's existence, believing that if war came, they would somehow manage with their 10,000 members and local security forces. And the Republic drifted toward the conflict that Sidious was carefully orchestrating, the manufactured crisis that would give him the power he needed to reshape the galaxy. Sidious had foreseen a terrible war and tried to prepare the Republic to survive it. Instead, his actions had given the Sith the exact tool they needed to ensure that war would destroy the very Jedi Order he had hoped to protect. The inhibitor chips he designed as a safeguard had become instruments of genocide. The army he commissioned to defend democracy would be the weapon that ended it. His vision had been correct. War was coming, and it would devastate the galaxy. What he had not foreseen was that in trying to prevent that catastrophe, he would enable it. The Clone Wars begin. For 10 years after Sidious' death, the clone army grew in secret on Camino. The Kaminoans refined their techniques, accelerated the clones' aging process so they would reach maturity faster, trained them in military tactics and weapons handling. The first generations of clones became trainers for subsequent generations, passing on the combat knowledge encoded in their genetic templates experience. Jango Fett personally oversaw elements of the training, ensuring that his fighting skills and tactical instincts were transmitted not just genetically, but through direct instruction. The clones themselves were remarkable beings. Genetically identical to Jango Fett, they shared his physical capabilities, his resilience, his natural warrior instincts. But the accelerated aging process and the behavioral modifications made them something different from their template. They aged at twice the normal rate, reaching maturity in 10 years rather than 20. They were designed to be more obedient than Jango, less likely to question orders, their independent thinking somewhat curtailed to make them ideal soldiers. Yet they were not droids. They could think, feel, form relationships. Each developed their own personality despite the genetic uniformity, differentiated by experience and individual choices within the parameters of their programming. They gave themselves names. The Kaminoans identified them by alphanumeric designations: CT-7567, CC-2224, CT-5555. But among themselves, the clones adopted names that reflected their personalities or experiences. CT-7567 became known as Rex. CC-2224 was Cody. CT-5555 earned the nickname Fives. These names became badges of individuality, assertions of personhood, in the face of the industrial replication that had created them. The clones were products of a cloning facility, but they were also people with hopes and fears and bonds of brotherhood that transcended their manufactured origins. The galaxy remained largely ignorant of their existence. The Jedi, focused on their peacekeeping duties and mediation of disputes, had no reason to search for Camino. The Galactic Senate, burdened with managing a republic of thousands of worlds, knew nothing of the secret army being created beyond their borders. Only the Sith watched and waited, confident that when the time came, their weapon would be ready. That time came in 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, though the final trigger would not be pulled for another decade. The Trade Federation, pressured by Darth Sidious behind the scenes, blockaded the peaceful world of Naboo. The crisis escalated, drawing in the Jedi and revealing the presence of the Sith for the first time in a millennium. Qui-Gon Jinn died at the hands of Darth Maul, confirming that the ancient enemies had returned. The political fallout led to Chancellor Valorum's removal from office and the election of Palpatine, the senator from Naboo, as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. Over the next 10 years, Sidious continued his manipulations. He encouraged separatist sentiment in the Outer Rim, supporting Count Dooku as the leader of what would become the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Thousands of star systems, frustrated with corruption in the Republic Senate and swayed by Dooku's charismatic arguments for independence, announced their intention to secede from the Republic. They began building their own military force, a droid army that would allow them to defend their independence from Republic intervention. The Republic faced a crisis. A significant portion of the galaxy wished to leave, and they had the military means to resist any attempt to force them back. The Jedi, for all their powers, could not fight a war against armies of battle droids. The Republic had no military to speak of, nothing that could stand against the Separatist threat. The Senate debated frantically, considering whether to create an army, whether to negotiate with the Separatists, whether to simply let the systems that wished to leave go in peace. It was in this climate of crisis that Obi-Wan Kenobi, following the trail of an assassin who had tried to kill Senator Padme Amidala, stumbled upon Kamino. The planet had been erased from the Jedi archives, but Obi-Wan deduced its location through other means. When he arrived on the water world, the Kaminoans welcomed him warmly, apparently expecting a Jedi inspection of the army they had been building. Prime Minister Lama Su gave Obi-Wan a tour of the cloning facilities, showed him the millions of soldiers in various stages of development, explained the specifications and training that Sifo Dyas had ordered. Obi-Wan was stunned. An entire army, millions of soldiers, created without the Jedi Council's knowledge or approval. Lama Su believed the army had been commissioned by the Republic on Sifo Dyas's authority. But Obi-Wan knew that Sifo Dyas had been dead for a decade, killed long before most of these clones had been created. Moreover, Obi-Wan encountered Jango Fett on Kamino and recognized that the bounty hunter was connected to the assassination attempts on Senator Amidala. The clone army, its origins in the current political crisis, were clearly connected, but Obi-Wan could not yet see how. He reported his discoveries to the Jedi Council. Yoda and Mace Windu were deeply troubled. They had not authorized this army. Neither had the Galactic Senate, as far as they knew. But the army existed, and the timing of its discovery was suspiciously convenient, given the Separatist threat. They began to suspect that they were seeing only part of a larger design, that events were being manipulated by an intelligence they could not yet identify. The dark side clouded everything, making it difficult to perceive the truth. Before they could investigate further, events moved rapidly. Obi-Wan followed Jango Fett to Geonosis, where he discovered that the Separatists were preparing for war. Count Dooku had gathered the leaders of the Confederacy, and they were finalizing the plans to use their droid armies against the Republic. Obi-Wan was captured, and his desperate transmission for help set in motion the chain of events that would trigger open warfare. Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala attempted a rescue, but were also captured. They were sentenced to execution in the Geonosian arena, along with Obi-Wan, When Mace Windu arrived with a strike force of Jedi to rescue them, the Separatists unleashed their droids. The Battle of Geonosis had begun, and the Jedi found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by Separatist forces. They would have been annihilated, the entire strike force lost, if not for the timely arrival of Master Yoda leading an army of clone troopers. The Galactic Senate, in emergency session during the crisis, had granted Chancellor Palpatine emergency powers to deal with the Separatist threat. Palpatine had immediately authorized the use of the clone army that Obi-Wan had discovered. The clones, transported aboard massive Republic attack cruisers, descended on Geonosis in overwhelming numbers. They rescued the Jedi strike force, drove back the Separatist droids, and won the Republic's first major military victory. The Clone Wars had begun. They would last 3 years, consuming the galaxy in conflict that touched thousands of worlds. The Waffle Jedi, who had been peacekeepers and diplomats, became generals and commanders. They led clone armies against Separatist forces, their training in lightsaber combat and force powers making them naturally suited to military leadership. Jedi, who had never commanded more than a handful of people in their lives, suddenly found themselves responsible for battalions and legions, their decisions affecting the lives of thousands. The clones proved to be exceptional soldiers. They were brave, skilled, and disciplined. They learned quickly, adapted to changing battlefield conditions, and developed tactical innovations that complemented their Jedi generals' abilities. Unlike droids, they could think creatively, take initiative, and form cohesive units bound by genuine camaraderie rather than mere programming. They called each other brother, and they meant it. More significantly, the clones and their Jedi generals developed real relationships. They fought side by side for 3 years, facing death together, celebrating victories, and mourning losses. Jedi, who had been trained to avoid attachments, found themselves caring about the troopers under their command, learning their names, mourning the ones who died. Clones who might have been just numbers, identical soldiers in a vast army, became individuals through their interactions with the Jedi and with each other. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Commander Cody developed a professional friendship built on mutual respect. Anakin Skywalker forged a particularly close bond with Captain Rex, the two men sharing a similar tactical approach and a willingness to take unconventional risks. Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's Padawan learner, formed close relationships with the clone troopers of the 501st Legion, who even painted their helmets to match her facial markings, a gesture of solidarity and affection. These bonds made the clones more effective soldiers. They trusted their Jedi generals, followed them into impossible situations, knew that the Jedi would do everything possible to keep them alive and achieve their objectives. The Jedi, in turn, came to depend on their clone commanders to trust their judgment and value their tactical input. It was a partnership, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of war. The Clone Wars saw the Jedi and the clones fighting as one, united in service to the Republic. None of them knew about the inhibitor chips. None of them suspected that inside every clone's brain was a biological time bomb, waiting for a single command to detonate. The chips were hidden deep in the clone's neurology, invisible to medical scans unless you knew exactly what to look for. The Jedi sensed no deception from the clones because there was none. The clones themselves did not know what had been done to them. They were genuinely loyal, genuinely cared about their Jedi generals, genuinely believed in the cause they fought for. For 3 years, the war raged. The Republic won some battles, lost others, slowly gained ground against the Separatist forces. The Jedi threw themselves into the war effort, trying to end the conflict as quickly as possible while preserving the Republic's democratic institutions. They did not realize that the war itself was a trap, that every battle they fought, every victory they won, brought them closer to the moment of their destruction. The Clone Wars were not about the Separatists versus the Republic. They were about preparing the galaxy for the Sith's emergence and creating the conditions under which the Jedi could be destroyed utterly. And finally, the bonds between Jedi and clones, those relationships of trust and mutual respect, were necessary for Order 66 to achieve its devastating effect. The betrayal had to come from trusted comrades, from brothers in arms, from soldiers who had stood beside the Jedi through years of war. Only then would it be swift enough, shocking enough, complete enough to eliminate the Jedi before they could respond. And when that moment came, when Order 66 was finally activated, those bonds would make the tragedy all the more profound. 3 years into the Clone Wars, on the frigid space station orbiting Ringo Vinda, something went terribly wrong with clone trooper CT-5385. His brothers called him Tup, a simple name for a soldier who had served with honor in the 501st Legion. He was unremarkable in most ways, one of millions of identical soldiers fighting for the Republic. But Tup would become the first crack in the Sith's carefully constructed plan, the moment when Order 66 nearly revealed itself too early. The battle at Ringo Vinda was brutal. The Republic forces, led by Jedi Generals Anakin Skywalker and Tippler, had fought their way through Separatist positions in fierce close-quarters combat. The space station's corridors were littered with damaged droids and fallen clone troopers. Both sides had taken heavy casualties, but the Republic was gradually gaining ground. Victory seemed within reach when Tup's inhibitor chip malfunctioned. The chip had been designed to remain dormant until activated by the specific command phrase for Order 66. It should have lain quiet in Tup's brain for however long the war lasted, indistinguishable from normal neural tissue, causing no problems and generating no symptoms. But organic technology, however sophisticated, can fail. Something went wrong in the chip's programming or structure. Perhaps it was damaged during combat. Perhaps there was a flaw in its construction. Perhaps the biological integration had degraded over time. The cause was never definitively determined. What happened was clear. Tup's behavioral inhibitor chip activated prematurely, without the order being issued. In an instant, the programmers flooded his consciousness. The Jedi were traitors. The Jedi had to be executed. These thoughts came not as suggestions, but as absolute certainties, overriding everything else in Tup's mind. He stopped being a soldier following orders and became a weapon with a single purpose. Jedi Master Tippler was near Tup's position, coordinating the assault. She had fought alongside these clone troopers for weeks, knew many of them by name, trusted them as comrades in battle. She had no reason to fear the clones around her, no reason to maintain a defensive posture against soldiers who had proven their loyalty in dozens of engagements. Her attention was focused forward, on the Separatist positions they still needed to capture. Tup raised his blaster and shot her in the head. The bolt struck instantly, a perfect shot from point-blank range. Tipler died before she could react, before she could sense danger through the force, before she even realized her own trooper had targeted her. She fell, her lightsaber deactivating as it slipped from her lifeless hand. The clones around her stood frozen in shock and confusion. What had just happened? Why had Tup fired? Was it an accident, a tragic error in the heat of battle? Tup himself seemed equally confused. He looked at his blaster as if uncertain how it had gotten there, his face showing the kind of bewilderment someone might display upon waking from a nightmare to find themselves in an unfamiliar place. He mumbled broken phrases, his voice uncertain. "Good soldiers follow orders." The words seemed to come from somewhere else, as if he was repeating something he had heard but couldn't quite remember when or why. The battle ground to a halt. Tiplar's death had shocked both Jedi generals. Her twin sister Tiplee, also a Jedi master fighting in the battle, sensed her sibling's death through the Force, felt that connection between them sever. The loss devastated her, but more than that, the circumstances confused her. A clone trooper, one of their own soldiers, had killed Tipler. Troopers did not shoot their Jedi generals. It was unthinkable, impossible. Yet it had happened. The Republic forces retreated, pulling back from their forward positions. The battle, which they had been winning, was abandoned. Getting Tup off Ringo Vinda and determining what had caused this incident became the priority. Something was desperately wrong, and if it could happen to one clone, might it happen to others? Were the clone troopers reliable? Could the Jedi trust the armies they commanded? Tup himself seemed to alternate between two states. Sometimes he was lucid, the clone trooper his brothers knew, confused and horrified by what he had done, but unable to explain why. Other times, he would slip into a trance-like condition, muttering about following orders, his eyes unfocused and his movements mechanical. The Kaminoans were contacted and requested that Tup be brought to their facilities on Kamino for examination. Whatever had caused this aberrant behavior, they needed to understand it. But Count Dooku, monitoring Republic military communications, learned of the incident immediately. He understood what had happened far better than the Jedi did. The inhibitor chip had malfunctioned. Order 66 had been partially activated in a single clone. If the Republic examined Tup thoroughly, if they discovered the chips and understood their purpose, the entire plan would be exposed. The Jedi would remove the chips from all the clones. The ability to execute Order 66 would be lost. Years of preparation would be wasted. Dooku contacted his master Darth Sidious and informed him of the crisis. Sidious, calm as always, gave precise instructions. They would let the Republic transport Tup back toward Kamino, but they had to ensure the clone never reached the cloning facilities alive. The Separatists would attack the medical ship, try to capture Tup, and in the chaos, the clone would die. It would appear as though the Separatists had been trying to learn Republic military secrets, not as though they were trying to prevent the discovery of the inhibitor chips. The Separatists attacked the medical frigate carrying Tup. They breached the hull, sending droids to capture the clone. The ship's defense systems were minimal, designed for medical work rather than combat. But ARC Trooper 5s and the other clones aboard fought desperately to protect their compromised brother. They managed to repel the separatist boarding party, but the attack left the medical ship crippled. They were forced to limp to Comino, barely making it to the cloning facilities before the ship's systems failed completely. On Camino, Tup was placed in intensive care. Chief Medical Scientist Nala Se, one of the Kaminoans most involved in the original clone design, personally oversaw his examination. She ran tests, scanned his brain, looked for any physical or chemical abnormality that might explain his behavior. She found the inhibitor chip. In Tup's case, the chip was clearly damaged, degraded tissue visible in the scans. This, she informed the Jedi and the Republic medics, was the source of the problem. But Nala Se lied about what the chip was. She told them it was a tumor, a growth that had developed in Tup's brain and caused behavioral changes. It was unfortunate, but not indicative of a systemic problem. Other clones would not develop similar tumors. Tup was an isolated case, a tragic medical anomaly. She recommended removing the tumor and continuing to monitor the situation, but assured everyone that this was not something that would affect the broader clone army. The Jedi had no reason to doubt her. The Kaminoans were the experts on clone biology. If Nala Se said it was a tumor, then it was a tumor. They were relieved, actually. An isolated medical problem was much better than a systemic flaw in the clone troopers' behavior or loyalty. They could continue to trust their clone armies. The war effort would not be compromised. What the Jedi and Republic medics did not know was that Nala Se was in direct communication with Count Dooku, still operating under his identity of Tyrannus, the mysterious figure who had helped oversee the clone army's creation. Dooku had contacted her as soon as he learned Tup was being taken to Camino. He reminded her of the importance of keeping the inhibitor chip's true purpose secret, gave her instructions on how to misdirect the investigation. Nala Se complied, whether out of loyalty to her original employer or simply a desire to protect her work and reputation. But Tup never recovered. The damage to his chip, or perhaps the chip's malfunction itself, had caused irreparable harm to his neural tissue. He died on the medical table in the Kaminoan facilities, his last words a confused apology to his fellow clone troopers, a desperate attempt to explain something he himself did not understand. His body was prepared for return to Coruscant, the inhibitor chip carefully hidden away by Nala Se, so that no autopsy would reveal its true nature. Tup died believing he was malfunctioning, a defective clone who had killed a Jedi for reasons he could not explain. His brothers mourned him as a good soldier who had been betrayed by his own biology. The Jedi mourned Master Tipler and moved forward with the war, relieved that the incident appeared to be isolated. And the Sith breathed a sigh of relief that their plan remained hidden, though they knew they had come dangerously close to exposure. But one clone trooper did not accept the official explanation. Tup's friend Fives, the ARC trooper who had fought so hard to protect him, knew something was wrong. Tumors did not make someone shoot their general and then mumble about following orders. Tumors did not cause the specific kind of behavioral change Tup had exhibited. Fives suspected there was more to the story, and he was determined to discover the truth, even if that truth was something the authorities did not want found. Fives discovers the conspiracy. CT-5555, called Fives by his brothers, was not content to let Tup's death remain a mystery. He had seen his friend go from a reliable soldier to a confused killer to a corpse in the space of days. The official explanation that a tumor had caused the aberrant behavior did not satisfy him. Fives had the kind of stubborn determination that had made him an ARC trooper, the elite among the clones. When something did not make sense, he investigated. When authorities told him to accept their answers, he asked more questions. He was on Camino when Tup died, having accompanied his friend for the medical examination. After Tup's body was prepared for transport back to Coruscant, Fives made a decision that would change everything. He would perform his own autopsy, examine Tup's body himself, and see if he could understand what had truly caused his friend's fatal malfunction. It was highly irregular, probably violated several protocols, but Fives was driven by a need for answers and a sense that something terrible was being covered up. He enlisted the help of a medical droid, convincing the mechanical physician to assist with an unauthorized examination. They carefully dissected Tup's brain tissue, looking for the tumor that supposedly had caused his death. What they found was not a tumor at all. It was an organic chip, biological technology embedded deep in Tup's neural tissue. The chip showed clear signs of damage. Its structure degraded in a way that explained the malfunction that had triggered Tipler's murder. Fives was stunned. This was not a tumor. This was an implant, something deliberately placed in Tup's brain. But why? What was its purpose? And most concerning of all, if Tup had one, did all the clones have them? Fives examined his own scans and found an identical structure in his own brain, undamaged but definitely present. Every clone had these chips. They had been implanted during the development process, part of the original design. The medical droid accessed technical files about the chips, information that Nalase had kept classified. The files revealed that the chips were called behavioral modification biochips, designed to ensure clone obedience to commands. They were linked to something called contingency orders, protocols that clone commanders had been trained to recognize. One of these orders was designated Order 66. When Order 66 was activated, it would compel the clones to execute their Jedi generals as traitors to the Republic. Fives felt his world collapse. Every clone, millions of them, had these chips in their brains, chips that could force them to murder the Jedi they served alongside. The entire clone army was a weapon aimed at the Order, waiting only for someone to pull the trigger. And Tup's malfunction meant the chips were degrading, that they might activate randomly, that the careful plan behind them might be coming apart, or worse, that the activation was imminent. He had to warn someone. He had to tell the Jedi what he had discovered. But who would believe him? A clone trooper claiming that the entire army had been sabotaged, that they were all potential assassins. It sounded like paranoia or madness. And if the people responsible for placing the chips found out that he knew about them, they would certainly try to silence him. Nalase discovered what Fives had done. She found him in the medical bay, the extracted chip from Tup's brain laid out as evidence. The medical droid's files open on the screen. Her reaction was swift and alarming. She insisted that Fives was malfunctioning, that the stress of Tup's death combined with whatever defect had caused Tup's chip to degrade had affected Fives as well. She ordered him sedated and prepared for chip removal, claiming it was for his own safety. Fives realized he was in danger. If Nalase removed his chip, she might reprogram it, damage it deliberately to make him seem unstable, or simply ensure he could never tell anyone what he had learned. He fought back, escaping from the medical facility with the help of the medical droid. He managed to contact Captain Rex and General Skywalker, his commanding officers, and begged them to listen to what he had discovered. Rex convinced Anakin to give Fives a chance to explain. They arranged a meeting on Coruscant at a military facility where Fives could present his evidence. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine himself was informed of the situation, as any conspiracy involving the clone army was a matter of the highest importance to Republic security. Palpatine, secretly Darth Sidious, realized that Fives was extremely close to exposing the entire plan for Order 66. He had to act carefully to ensure the conspiracy remained hidden while eliminating the threat Fives represented. When Fives met with Anakin and Rex, he tried desperately to explain what he had found. He told them about the chips in every clone's brain. He described the files he had seen, the mention of Order 66, the fact that the chips could force the clones to kill Jedi against their will. His words came fast and desperate, his composure cracking under the weight of what he knew and the fear that no one would believe him. Anakin was troubled but uncertain. Fives was clearly agitated, possibly not thinking clearly. The story he told sounded like a conspiracy theory, the kind of paranoid fantasy that could take root in someone under extreme stress. But Anakin also knew Fives, trusted him as a soldier who had proven himself reliable countless times. He did not dismiss Fives' concerns immediately, instead tried to calm him down and get him to explain more methodically. That was when Palpatine entered the room. The Chancellor expressed concern for Fives' well-being, suggesting that the clone was clearly under tremendous strain and needed medical attention. He was kind and grandfatherly in his manner, the concerned leader who cared about even the lowliest soldier in his command. But he also subtly planted suggestions that Fives might be unstable, that his accusations might be delusions brought on by stress, or the same malfunction that had affected Tup. Fives, seeing Palpatine, suddenly felt a surge of certainty. The Chancellor was involved. He did not know how he knew, but looking at Palpatine's face, he was absolutely sure that the elderly politician was part of the conspiracy. The chips, the planned betrayal of the Jedi, all of it somehow tied back to the Supreme Chancellor. He made the mistake of accusing Palpatine directly, his voice rising in accusation, his finger pointing at the most powerful man in the Republic. This gave Palpatine exactly what he needed. He staggered back, feigning fear, calling for security. He claimed that Fives was attempting to assassinate him, that the clone had become violently unstable. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn, surrounding Fives. Anakin and Rex were forced to step back, unable to defend a clone trooper who appeared to be threatening the Supreme Chancellor. Fives ran. He had no choice. If he was captured then, they would either kill him immediately or lock him away where he could never tell anyone what he had discovered. He fled into the maze of Coruscant's lower levels, trying to find somewhere safe, somewhere he could regroup and find a way to prove what he knew. He contacted Rex, begged his captain to meet him, to give him one more chance to explain. Rex came, bringing Anakin with him. They found Fives in a grimy maintenance level, the clone trooper exhausted and desperate. He tried once more to explain about the chips, about Order 66, about the conspiracy that threatened the Jedi. His words were fragmented, his thoughts disorganized by fear and fatigue. He begged them to believe him, to investigate, to check the clones for the chips before it was too late. As he spoke, clone shock troopers from the Coruscant Guard entered the maintenance level, weapons raised. They had orders to take Fives into custody, to use lethal force if necessary. Commander Fox, leading the shock troopers, called for Fives to surrender. Fives panicked, reached for something in his pocket. It might have been nothing, a gesture of frustration or desperation, but Fox interpreted it as an aggressive movement. Fox shot Fives. The blast caught Fives in the chest, a fatal wound. He collapsed into Rex's arms, blood spreading across his armor. In his final moments, with his strength fading, Fives tried once more to warn his brothers. He told Rex that the nightmare was coming, that there was something in every clone's mind that would make them do terrible things. He begged Rex to find a way to stop it, to protect the Jedi from what was coming. Then CT-5555 died, taking his knowledge of Order 66 with him to the grave, or so it seemed. Rex heard his warnings but did not fully understand them. Anakin witnessed Fives' death, but attributed his final words to the confused ramblings of a dying man affected by trauma and possible neural damage. The investigation into Fives' claims was cursory and concluded that stress had caused a psychological break, leading to his paranoid accusations and subsequent death. Later, Rex would file a confidential grievance report about what he had witnessed. He documented Fives' claims about the inhibitor chips and the conspiracy, noting that he could not prove anything but felt obligated to record what his brother had tried to tell him. The report disappeared into military bureaucracy, read by few and believed by none. It would not resurface until after Order 66 had already been executed, when it was far too late to prevent the catastrophe Fives had tried to stop. Nala Se, back on Kamino, received confirmation that the threat Fives posed had been eliminated. She submitted a report to her contact, still believing him to be Tyrannus, the original overseer of the clone project. The report explained that one clone had come dangerously close to discovering the truth about the inhibitor chips, but had been successfully silenced. She recommended continued monitoring for other potential malfunctions, but expressed confidence that the chips remained secure and functional. Count Dooku read the report and shared it with his master. Darth Sidious was pleased. The crisis had been averted. Fives was dead, his warnings dismissed as delusions. The Jedi suspected nothing. The clone army remained loyal and unsuspecting. Order 66 could still be executed as planned. They had come perilously close to exposure, but the Sith's patience and careful manipulation had preserved their scheme. Fives was buried with military honors as a fallen ARC trooper who had given his life in service to the Republic. His brothers mourned him, confused by his final actions, but respecting his service and sacrifice. The Jedi sensed nothing through the Force, no warning that one of their most loyal soldiers had died trying to save them from the greatest betrayal in galactic history. The chips remained hidden, dormant, waiting for the single command that would transform millions of loyal soldiers into perfect assassins. The investigation into inhibitor chips ended. Tup was remembered as a clone who had suffered a tragic medical malfunction. Fives was remembered as a soldier who had broken under stress. And the conspiracy that would destroy the Jedi Order remained perfectly concealed its exposure prevented by the murder of one ARC trooper who had tried to do the right thing. The final days, the Clone Wars, ground toward their conclusion in the final months of the conflict. 3 years of brutal warfare had taken their toll on both sides. The Separatists, despite their vast droid armies and the tactical genius of General Grievous, were being pushed back on multiple fronts. The Republic forces, led by Jedi generals and clone commanders who had learned war's harsh lessons through experience, pressed their advantages with increasing effectiveness. Victory seemed within reach, but the war had also taken its toll on the Jedi themselves. The Order, designed for peace and meditation, had been transformed into a military organization. Jedi, who should have been studying philosophy and training Padawans, were instead commanding armies and making decisions that affected millions of lives. The emotional and spiritual strain was immense. Many Jedi felt themselves slipping, finding anger easier to access than calm, discovering that the dark side's temptations grew stronger when surrounded by death and violence. Anakin Skywalker perhaps exemplified this strain more than any other Jedi. He had become one of the Republic's most celebrated generals, a hero whose exploits were legendary. But his marriage to Senator Padme Amidala remained secret, a violation of the Jedi Code that forced him to live a double life. His friendship with Chancellor Palpatine had deepened, the elder politician serving as a confidant and mentor in ways the Jedi Council did not. And his fear, always his greatest weakness, was growing. He suffered nightmares of Padme dying in childbirth, visions that might have been prophecy or simply the fears of a worried husband manifesting in sleep. The Jedi Council's distrust of Palpatine had been growing as well. The Supreme Chancellor had accrued enormous power during the war, using emergency authority to centralize control and extend his own term in office indefinitely. What had begun as temporary measures to deal with the crisis had become permanent fixtures of Republic governance. The Jedi sensed something wrong but could not pinpoint what it was. The dark side clouded everything, making it impossible to see clearly. Events reached a crisis point 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, in the final days of the Clone Wars. On Mandalore, Ahsoka Tano led a siege against Maul, the former Sith apprentice who had carved out his own criminal empire. The mission was technically unofficial, as Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order years earlier after being falsely accused of terrorism. But she fought alongside clone troopers of the 501st Legion, including Captain Rex, her former commander and friend. They painted their helmets to honor her, orange markings that matched the patterns on her headtails. On Coruscant, Mace Windu made a decision that would trigger the final catastrophe. He had learned through intelligence from Anakin Skywalker that Chancellor Palpatine was in fact Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had been manipulating the Republic from the shadows. The revelation explained everything: the war, the emergency powers, the way events always seemed to favor Palpatine's accumulation of authority. The Chancellor was their ancient enemy, the hidden hand behind all the galaxy's suffering. Mace led a team of Jedi Masters to arrest Palpatine. They included some of the Order's finest warriors: Kit Fisto, known for his expertise with Form 1 lightsaber combat, Agan Kola, a skilled duelist, and Saesee Tiin, a master of space combat who was equally deadly with a blade. They entered the Chancellor's office, weapons drawn, informing him that he was under arrest for treason against the Republic. Palpatine dropped all pretense. He was indeed Darth Sidious, and he was far more powerful than the Jedi had imagined. His lightsaber appeared in his hand with preternatural speed, its blade crimson and burning. The battle was swift and brutal. Palpatine moved faster than should have been possible, his blade a blur. Agen Kola died in seconds. Kit Fisto, one of the Order's best duelists, lasted only slightly longer. Sayasi Teen fell without managing a single effective strike. Only Mace Windu proved to be Palpatine's equal. The senior Jedi Master engaged Sidious in a fierce duel, his mastery of Vapad allowing him to use the Sith Lord's own dark side power against him. They fought across Palpatine's office, their blades clashing with such force that windows shattered and furniture was reduced to splinters. For a few breathless minutes, the fate of the galaxy hung on the outcome of this single combat. Mace won. He drove Palpatine back to the window, disarmed him, and held his lightsaber at the Sith Lord's throat. Palpatine appeared defeated, his face twisted with pain, his body racked by the Force lightning that had rebounded on him. Victory seemed complete. The Sith Lord would be arrested, tried, and the truth about the war's origins exposed. The Jedi had won. But Anakin Skywalker arrived at that crucial moment. He had been wrestling with his loyalties, torn between his duty as a Jedi and his desperation to save Padme from the death he had foreseen in his visions. Palpatine had promised to teach him the power to prevent death, claiming it was knowledge the Jedi would not share. Anakin burst into the office to see Mace standing over a seemingly helpless Palpatine. What happened next would echo through history. Mace declared that Palpatine was too dangerous to be taken alive, that he had to be executed immediately. Anakin protested, arguing for a trial for justice rather than summary execution. But his real motivation was more selfish and desperate. If Palpatine died, the knowledge that could save Padme died with him. Anakin could not allow that. When Mace moved to strike the killing blow, Anakin intervened. He drew his lightsaber and severed Mace's sword hand. The Jedi Master's weapon fell away, his defense gone. Palpatine, no longer helpless, unleashed a torrent of Force lightning. The dark side energy hurled Mace through the shattered window, sending him plummeting hundreds of stories to his death. The greatest Jedi warrior of the age died confused and betrayed, killed by the very person he had been trying to protect. Palpatine rose, his face twisted not by pain, but by triumph. He offered Anakin everything the young Jedi desired: power, knowledge, the ability to save those he loved. All he had to do was embrace the dark side, become Sidious' apprentice, help complete the grand design that would transform the Republic into the empire the galaxy truly needed. Anakin, crushed by what he had just done, overwhelmed by fear for Padme, and exhausted by years of war, made his choice. He knelt before Darth Sidious and pledged himself to the Sith. Sidious gave him a new name, one that would become synonymous with terror across the galaxy: Darth Vader, the Chosen One. The Jedi who was supposed to bring balance to the Force had fallen to darkness, and with his fall, the mechanisms for the Jedi's destruction were activated. Sidious gave Vader his first command as a Sith apprentice. He was to take the 501st Legion, the clone troopers who had served under him throughout the war, and march on the Jedi Temple. He was to kill every Jedi he found there, starting with the younglings, the children training to become the next generation of Guardians. It was a test and a point of no return. Once Vader committed this act, there could be no going back, no redemption, no return to the light. Vader accepted the mission without hesitation or question. The Anakin Skywalker, who had loved the Jedi, who had been a hero of the Republic, was dead. In his place stood Darth Vader, a Sith Lord committed to the destruction of everything his former self had valued. As Vader marched toward the temple with his legion, as the pieces fell into place for the greatest catastrophe in Jedi history, Darth Sidious prepared to issue the command that would end the war and eliminate the Jedi in a single stroke. He activated his holographic communicator and began transmitting to clone commanders across the galaxy. The message was brief, just 2 words and a number. But those words would transform millions of loyal soldiers into unwilling assassins. Execute Order 66. The transmission went out simultaneously across thousands of star systems. In command centers and battlefields, in ships and encampments, clone commanders received a holographic message from Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The image quality varied depending on location and equipment, but the message was always the same. The elderly politician's face appeared, his voice calm and certain, delivering a command that clone officers had been trained to recognize but never expected to hear. Execute Order 66. That was all. 3 words, but they were enough. In clone commanders' minds, training took over. Order 66 was a contingency protocol for dealing with a specific type of threat. The Jedi had betrayed the Republic. They were attempting a coup, trying to seize control of the government. They had revealed themselves as enemies and had to be terminated immediately, without warning, without hesitation. Clone commanders acknowledged the order and began relaying it to their troops. But the training was only part of what happened. As the order was transmitted across military communications networks, it activated something else. In millions of clone brains, inhibitor chips received a signal. Organic technology responded to the command phrase. Behavioral modification programming engaged. In an instant, every clone trooper's perception of their Jedi general changed fundamentally. The transformation was not gradual. One moment, the clones saw their Jedi commanders as respected leaders, friends, people they had fought alongside for 3 years. The next moment, those same Jedi were traitors, enemies of the Republic, threats that had to be eliminated. The clones retained their awareness, their memories, their personalities. But layered over all of that was an overwhelming compulsion to kill the Jedi. Any loyalty, any affection, any respect they had felt was overridden by the chip's programming. Some clones tried to resist. Captain Rex, leading forces alongside Ahsoka Tano on the Star Destroyer, transporting Maul back to Coruscant, felt the order activate. For a few critical seconds, he fought against the compulsion. His face twisted with effort, his body shaking as he tried to override the chip's command through sheer willpower. He managed to speak 3 words to Ahsoka. "Find him. 5s." Those words saved Ahsoka's life. She understood immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. She had felt a disturbance in the Force, sensed Anakin fall into darkness, though she did not yet understand what had happened to him. Now Rex's warning, combined with her Force sensitivity, allowed her to anticipate the danger. When Rex and the other clones raised their weapons and opened fire, she was ready. The clones around her, men she had fought beside for years, Soldiers who had painted their helmets to honor her were trying to kill her. Their faces showed no malice, just cold determination. They were following orders, executing a legitimate contingency protocol. The fact that it meant murdering someone they had considered a comrade and friend did not matter. The chips overrode those emotional connections. Ahsoka fought defensively, unwilling to kill the clones even as they tried to kill her. She used her lightsabers to deflect blaster bolts, her force powers to disable weapons and push attackers back. She moved through the Star Destroyer with acrobatic grace, trying to reach a secure location where she could figure out what was happening and why. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit continued unabated. The clones would not stop. They could not stop. The chips would not allow it. On Kashyyyk, Grand Master Yoda was meeting with Wookiee leaders when the order was transmitted. He sensed the disturbance immediately, felt thousands of Jedi deaths in the Force as Order 66 executed across the galaxy. Clone troopers turned their weapons on Jedi who stood beside them, unaware and unprepared. The betrayal was so complete, so sudden, that most Jedi died in the first moments. Yoda's connection to the Force gave him critical seconds of warning. When Commander Gree and another clone approached him from behind, weapons raised, Yoda sensed their killing intent. He drew his lightsaber and struck in one fluid motion, decapitating both clones before they could fire. It was a terrible necessity, killing soldiers who were following what they believed to be legitimate orders. But Yoda understood immediately that something had corrupted the clones, that they were not acting of their own free will. Wookiee warriors, led by Chewbacca and Tarful, helped Yoda escape. They fought their way through clone positions, the Wookiees engaging their supposed allies to protect the Jedi Master. Yoda disappeared into Kashyyyk's forests, one of the few Jedi to survive the initial execution of Order 66. He carried with him the knowledge that the Order had fallen, that 10,000 Jedi had been reduced to a handful of survivors in an afternoon. On Utapau, Obi-Wan Kenobi had just killed General Grievous, dealing a critical blow to the Separatist military leadership. He was riding a Varactyl, a lizard-like mount, discussing the next phase of the campaign with Commander Cody. The two men had developed a strong professional relationship over years of fighting together. They trusted each other implicitly. Cody received the transmission, "Execute Order 66." His attitude toward Obi-Wan changed instantly. Where moments before he had been speaking with respect to his general, now he saw only a target. He ordered his troops to open fire on Obi-Wan. The blaster cannons of an ATTE Walker targeted the Jedi Master. The shots were precise, aimed to kill. Obi-Wan survived only because he was mounted and moving. The blaster cannon destroyed the Varactyl, but Obi-Wan fell into the water below, avoiding the worst of the attack. The clones assumed he was dead. Obi-Wan, stunned and injured, had to process what had just happened. Cody, his loyal commander, had ordered his execution without warning or hesitation. The clones he had fought beside for 3 years had tried to kill him. He did not yet understand why, but he knew he had to escape immediately. While Order 66 executed across 1,000 battlefields, the most devastating blow struck at the heart of the Jedi Order itself. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant, that ancient fortress of wisdom and light, became the site of unprecedented horror. What transpired there would be remembered as Operation Nightfall. though the clones who participated knew it simply as their orders. They were to secure the temple, eliminate all resistance, and ensure that no Jedi escaped to threaten the new order that was being born. Leading the assault was Darth Vader, hours removed from being Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. He marched at the head of the 501st Legion, clone troopers who had served under him throughout the Clone Wars. These soldiers had followed Anakin into impossible situations, trusted his judgment, celebrated his victories. They had painted their armor with markings that honored his command, developed individual relationships with him over years of fighting together. Now they followed him to murder the order he had once served. The clones themselves did not fully understand Anakin's transformation. They saw him unmasked, his face bearing the same features they had always known, but something in his demeanor had changed. His eyes held a different light. His movements carried a new weight of purpose and darkness. A few clones, those with command positions who might have questioned such a radical mission, received direct orders explaining that Skywalker had refused to side with the Jedi Order's treasonous actions, that he remained loyal to the Republic and the Chancellor. The explanation satisfied most concerns. The general remained the general, and if he ordered them to attack the temple, there must be good reason. The assault began in the evening as Coruscant's artificial lighting systems simulated dusk across the planet-wide city. Vader led his legion up the temple's grand stairs, those wide steps that countless Jedi had climbed over millennia. As he reached the top, a Jedi temple guard approached, recognizing something familiar in the approaching figure, despite the changed presence. "Skywalker," the guard breathed, his voice carrying recognition and confusion in equal measure. He had known Anakin, had served alongside him perhaps, had at minimum respected him as one of the Order's heroes. The confusion lasted only a moment. Vader's lightsaber, now burning red with synthetic crystal corruption, ignited and cut the guard down before he could raise his own blade in defense. The temple's outer defenses had been breached. The 501st poured into the temple behind Vader, their blasters raised, their faces hidden behind identical helmets. They were not mindless automatons. The clones remained fully aware of their actions, conscious of the fact that they were invading the Jedi Temple, that they were hunting the very people who had trained many of them personally. But the inhibitor chips gave them certainty. The Jedi were traitors. This was justice. Good soldiers followed orders. The Jedi inside the temple were caught completely unprepared. Most of the Order's senior masters were deployed across the galaxy, commanding clone armies in the final pushes to defeat the Separatists. The temple's population consisted primarily of administrators, archivists, instructors, and younglings, the children training to become the next generation of Jedi. These were not warriors on high alert. They were people engaged in study, meditation, and education. Many did not even have their lightsabers immediately accessible when the attack began. Chin Dralik, the temple's master of lightsaber instruction and one of the Order's finest duelists, organized what resistance he could. He gathered every able Jedi he could find, trying to create defensive positions and protect the younglings. But the attack came from too many angles simultaneously. The clones pushed deeper into the temple with methodical efficiency, their training and superior numbers overwhelming the defenders. And wherever the Jedi seemed to be gaining ground, Vader appeared. The newly anointed Sith Lord moved through the temple corridors like a dark storm. His lightsaber cut down Jedi who had once been his colleagues, his friends, people who had trusted and respected him. He showed no hesitation, no mercy, no recognition of the bonds that had once existed. Every Jedi who stood before him fell. His power in the Force, always considerable, seemed to have grown darker and more terrible with his fall to the Sith. Kindralig confronted Vader directly, attempting to hold a critical corridor that led to chambers where younglings were sheltering. The lightsaber master was one of the finest duelists in the Order, his expertise unmatched by all but a handful of Jedi. He engaged Vader with every technique he knew, every strategy he had taught to generations of students. For a few desperate minutes, he held his own, his blade moving with practiced precision. But Vader had been taught by the same masters, had studied the same techniques. More crucially, he fought with the dark side now, with anger and hate fueling his power. Where Sindralig drew on the Force with calm discipline, Vader channeled rage and aggression. The duel ended when Vader's blade pierced Dralig's guard and ran him through. The master of lightsaber combat died defending the younglings he had trained, buying them perhaps a few more minutes of life. Vader continued deeper into the temple. He reached the chambers where the youngest students huddled, children who barely understood what was happening, who had been told by their instructors to hide and stay quiet. When Vader entered, a small boy approached him. The child recognized Anakin Skywalker, the hero general, the chosen one who was supposed to bring balance to the Force. Surely Master Skywalker would protect them from whatever danger threatened the temple. "Master Skywalker," the child said, his voice carrying relief and hope. "There are too many of them. What are we going to do?" Vader ignited his lightsaber. The red blade bathed the room in crimson light. His answer to the child's question was final and absolute. None of the younglings survived. Throughout the temple, similar horrors unfolded. Jedi who tried to flee were gunned down by clone troopers in the corridors. Those who attempted to fight were overwhelmed by numbers and the relentless efficiency of trained soldiers. The temple archives, containing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, were secured by the clones. Valuable holocrons, ancient texts, the documented wisdom of centuries, all of it fell into Imperial hands. Vader himself went to the temple's communication center. There, he altered the beacon that called Jedi back to the temple from across the galaxy. The beacon was designed to alert all Jedi in the field if some catastrophe threatened Coruscant, summoning them home to help defend the Order. Vader reprogrammed it to transmit a different message. He broadcast that the war was over, that the Separatists had been defeated, and that all Jedi should return to the temple immediately for new assignments. It was a trap of exquisite cruelty. Jedi who had survived Order 66, who had escaped their clone troopers through luck or the Force's warning, would receive this message. They would believe it was legitimate. The war they had been fighting for 3 years was finally over. They could return home, reunite with their fellow Jedi, perhaps begin the process of recovering from the trauma of war. They would walk directly into waiting clone squads who would execute them immediately upon arrival. Some Jedi fell for this deception. They returned to the temple, relieved that the war had ended, expecting to find their order intact and preparing for the reconstruction of the Republic. Instead, they found a garrison of clones, fortified positions, and swift death. The temple became not a sanctuary, but an execution ground, Vader's altered beacon luring survivors to their doom. The flames began as the fighting intensified, whether through deliberate action or as collateral damage from the battle. Fires broke out in multiple sections of the temple. The ancient structure, built over millennia with materials meant to endure ages, began to burn. Smoke rose into Coruscant's evening sky, visible for kilometers across the planet city. Citizens looked up and saw the Jedi temple burning, though they did not yet understand what it meant. From her apartment, Senator Padme Amidala watched the temple burn. She did not know the details of what was happening there, did not understand that her husband was leading the assault. She knew only that something terrible was occurring, that the Jedi were under attack, that the Republic she loved was transforming into something dark and frightening. Her fear for Anakin grew as the evening progressed, though she could not have imagined the truth of what he had become. By the time the assault concluded, the temple was secure. Most of the Jedi within had been killed. A few had managed to escape into chaos, fleeing into Coruscant's lower levels or stealing ships from the temple hangar. The bodies of the dead were collected, prepared for a public funeral pyre that would send a message to the galaxy. The Jedi had attempted a coup against legitimate authority. They had been stopped. This was justice, not tragedy. Vader returned to Palpatine to report the mission's success. The newly proclaimed Emperor was pleased with his apprentice's performance. Operation Nightfall had accomplished its objectives flawlessly. The Jedi Order's center of power had been destroyed, its archives secured, its temple transformed from a beacon of light into a monument to the Empire's absolute control. The assault on Coruscant would be remembered as the moment when the Jedi's 1,000-generation legacy ended in blood and fire. But Operation Nightfall was only the most dramatic execution of Order 66. Across the galaxy, thousands of other Jedi died in the same hours, betrayed by the very soldiers they commanded. Each death was a tragedy. Each betrayal was a wound in the Force. The temple's fall was the exclamation point on a sentence written in Jedi blood across 1,000 star systems. Galaxy-wide massacre Order 66 did not discriminate. It targeted every Jedi regardless of rank, experience, or location. Grand Masters and younglings, warriors and healers, those on the front lines and those in meditation chambers, all were designated as traitors to be executed immediately. The clone troopers carried out their orders with mechanical precision across every world where Jedi served. Within minutes of Palpatine's transmission, the massacre began. On Megiddo, Ki-Adi-Mundi commanded clone forces in an assault on separatist positions. The Syrian Jedi Master was a member of the Jedi Council, a wise leader who had guided the Order through difficult decisions during the war. He stood in the middle of his troops, directing their advance with calm authority. They had fought together through numerous campaigns, developed trust through shared danger. When Order 66 activated, that trust became a weapon. The clones behind Ki-Adi-Mundi raised their blasters and opened fire. The first shots struck him in the back, a betrayal so complete that for a crucial moment he could not process what was happening. His awareness through the Force should have warned him, should have alerted him to the danger, but the clones felt no malice, no killing intent in the traditional sense. They were following legitimate orders against a legitimate target. The Force gave no warning, because from the clones' perspective, they were doing nothing wrong. Ki-Adi-Mundi turned, his lightsaber igniting, deflecting some of the incoming fire, but there were too many shooters, too many angles of attack. The blaster bolts overwhelmed his defenses. He fell in the snow of Megiddo, his crimson blood staining the white ground, one of the first council members to die in Order 66's initial wave. In the skies above Cato-Neimoidia, Plo Koon piloted a starfighter alongside clone pilots who had flown with him through dozens of missions. The Keldor Jedi Master was renowned for his skill in space combat and his compassion toward the clone troopers under his command. He treated them as individuals rather than expendable assets, earned their genuine affection and loyalty. None of that mattered when the order came. The clone pilots received their instructions. They broke formation, positioned themselves around Plo Koon's fighter, and opened fire with coordinated precision. Their marksmanship was perfect. The concentrated fire destroyed Plo Koon's ship immediately, giving him no chance to eject or defend himself. He died in the explosion, his starfighter disintegrating in a brief flare of light. The clone pilots who killed him felt satisfaction at a mission accomplished, nothing more. On Felucia, Aayla Secura led her troops through dense jungle, pursuing the remnants of a separatist force. The Twi'lek Jedi Master moved with grace through the alien vegetation, her blue skin and head tails marking her as distinctive even among the colorful flora. Commander Bly, who had served as her right hand throughout the war, marched nearby. They had saved each other's lives multiple times, developed a kind of partnership that only comes from shared combat experience. Order 66 transformed Bly and his troops into Ayla's executioners. They surrounded her position, raised their weapons, and fired without warning. Aayla died without understanding why, cut down by sustained blaster fire from every direction simultaneously. Her body fell among the Felucia plant life, one more victim of the galaxy-wide betrayal. Bly reported the mission successful and moved on to the next objective, feeling nothing about what he had just done except professional satisfaction at following orders correctly. On Salukami, Stas Alley rode a bark speeder across open terrain, clone troopers flanking her position. The Jedi Master was conducting a patrol, searching for separatist holdouts in the wake of a recent victory. She felt no particular danger, had no reason to suspect threat from the soldiers she commanded. When Order 66 activated, the clones adjusted their position slightly and opened fire on her speeder. The concentrated blaster fire destroyed the speeder's engine and steering mechanisms. The vehicle spun out of control, crashed, and exploded. Stas Alley died in the wreckage, killed by troops who had guarded her position moments before. The clones reported her death and continued their patrol pattern, their mission parameters simply having changed to include eliminating their Jedi commander. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated endlessly. Jedi leading troops into battle suddenly found those same troops shooting them. Jedi coordinating strategies with clone commanders discovered those commanders had become their assassins. Jedi meditating in field camps or tending to wounded soldiers were gunned down by their own guards. The betrayal was total, simultaneous, and executed with perfect efficiency. Some Jedi survived the initial moments through exceptional awareness or fortunate circumstances. Luminara Unduli, a Jedi master known for her wisdom and combat skill, sensed danger just in time to deflect the first volley of blaster fire. She fought her way through her own troops, eventually escaping into the wilds of Kashyyyk. Her survival would prove temporary, as she was later captured and imprisoned by the Empire. But she lived through Order 66's immediate execution. Coleman Kaj, a Jedi Master, survived through simple luck. He was in a location where no clone troopers were present when the order was issued. He immediately went into hiding, recognizing that something catastrophic had occurred. Oppo Renacisis, a long-serving council member, was similarly absent from clone presence when Order 66 executed. These survivors would spend the rest of their lives hiding, always aware that they were being hunted. The younger Jedi, those still learning their powers and lacking the combat experience of the Masters, had virtually no chance. Padawans who might have grown into powerful Jedi were cut down before they fully understood what was happening. Their masters, trying desperately to protect their students, often died alongside them. The relationship between master and apprentice, that sacred bond of teaching and learning, ended in screaming and blood across 100 worlds. Not all clone troopers executed the order perfectly. The inhibitor chips were sophisticated but not infallible. A small number of clones, perhaps those whose chips had degraded slightly or whose neural architecture resisted the programming, experienced hesitation or confusion. But these cases were rare exceptions. The vast majority of clone troopers turned on their Jedi immediately, their actions precise and coordinated. The efficiency of the massacre was terrifying. Within the first hour, thousands of Jedi died. By the end of the first day, perhaps 90% of the Order was gone. The Jedi had numbered around 10,000 at the Clone Wars' beginning. 3 years of warfare had reduced their rank somewhat, with battlefield casualties and losses to injury. Order 66 reduced them further to perhaps less than 100 survivors, scattered and hiding, hunted across the galaxy. The Republic military, the Senate, and civilian populations received carefully crafted explanations. The Jedi had attempted to overthrow the government, Chancellor Palpatine announced. They had revealed themselves as enemies of democracy, seeking to impose their will on the Republic through force. The clone troopers, loyal to legitimate authority, had stopped the coup attempt. The Jedi Order was disbanded, their property seized, their remaining members declared enemies of the state. Most citizens believed this narrative. The Jedi had always been somewhat mysterious, powerful Force users whose abilities separated them from normal people. It was not difficult to believe they might have grown arrogant, might have decided their wisdom entitled them to rule. The war had made everyone weary and desperate for stability. If eliminating the Jedi meant ending the conflict and restoring peace, many were willing to accept that trade. The surviving Jedi faced a galaxy utterly transformed. They had been honored guardians, respected diplomats, welcomed wherever they went. Overnight, they became hunted fugitives. Any use of Force powers might alert Imperial forces to their presence. Their lightsabers, once symbols of their calling, became liabilities that had to be hidden or destroyed. The very thing that made them Jedi, their connection to the Force, became a threat to their survival. Some went into deep hiding, abandoning their Jedi identities entirely. They took new names, new lives, deliberately suppressing their Force abilities to avoid detection. Others continued to use their powers to help people, working in secret to oppose the Empire and protect the innocent. A few sought revenge, hunting the Emperor and Vader, trying to strike back against the power that had destroyed their order. None of these paths led to easy or happy outcomes. The scale of the loss was incomprehensible. An institution that had existed for 25,000 years, that had produced countless heroes and saved countless lives, that had held the galaxy together through wisdom and compassion, gone in an afternoon. The accumulated knowledge of centuries, the training facilities and temples, the artifacts and holocrons, the relationships and traditions, all destroyed or seized by the Empire. The Jedi, as an organized force in galactic affairs, had ceased to exist. The survivors. Yet some did survive, and their stories would prove crucial to the galaxy's future. Each survivor's tale was unique, shaped by circumstance and choice, by luck, and the Force's will. These scattered remnants carried with them the last embers of the Jedi Order, keeping alive the possibility that one day, perhaps, the light would return. Yoda escaped Kashyyyk with the help of Chewbacca and Tarful. The ancient Grand Master returned to Coruscant under cover, meeting with Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had also survived his betrayal on Utapau. Together, they infiltrated the burning Jedi Temple, discovering the horror of what Vader had done there. Yoda fought through his grief to take practical action. He reprogrammed the temple beacon, altering Vader's trap message to instead warn all surviving Jedi to stay away from Coruscant, to go into hiding and await the Force's guidance. This simple act saved many lives. Jedi who received the warning understood that something catastrophic had occurred. Rather than returning to the temple as Vader's original message instructed, they fled to remote systems, abandoned their former identities, and began the long process of surviving in a galaxy that now wanted them dead. The warning gave them crucial information and time to establish their hiding places before the Empire's hunt intensified. Yoda confronted the newly proclaimed Emperor Palpatine, now openly wielding the dark side as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Their duel in the Senate chamber was titanic. Two of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy unleashing their full might against each other. The fight raged across the vast legislative space, their powers shaking the foundations of democracy itself. But Yoda could not defeat Sidious. After a fierce exchange, the Jedi Master was forced to retreat, recognizing that he could not win this battle. Accepting defeat, Yoda went into exile. He chose Dagobah, a remote swamp world strong in the Force, where his presence would be masked by the planet's natural Force emanations. There he would wait, meditating on his failures, preparing for a future he could barely glimpse, trusting that the Force had a plan even if he could not perceive it. He would remain on Dagobah for nearly 2 decades, training one final student who would restore what had been lost. Obi-Wan Kenobi confronted Anakin Skywalker, now Darth Vader, on the volcanic world of Mustafar. The duel between the former master and apprentice was emotionally devastating, each man fighting not just with lightsabers, but with the weight of betrayed love and loyalty. Obi-Wan pleaded with Anakin to turn back from darkness, to see what he had become. Vader consumed by rage and self-justification, attacked with fury. The fight ended with Vader defeated, his limbs severed, his body burning on the shores of a lava river. Obi-Wan, unable to deliver the killing blow to someone he had loved as a brother, left Vader to die. But Palpatine arrived and saved his apprentice, reconstructing Vader's broken body with cybernetic life support. The man who had been Anakin Skywalker became more machine than human, trapped in a suit of black armor, breathing through mechanical lungs, his face hidden behind an emotionless mask. Obi-Wan took Anakin and Padme's newborn twins, Luke and Leia, and went into hiding. He brought Luke to Tatooine to be raised by Owen and Beru Lars, Anakin's stepfamily. Leia was adopted by Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, raised as a princess in a household of wealth and influence. Obi-Wan himself remained on Tatooine, watching over Luke from a distance, becoming the hermit Ben Kenobi, waiting for the day when the boy would need him. Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex survived together. Ahsoka managed to remove Rex's inhibitor chip, using her knowledge of what Fives had tried to warn them about. Rex, freed from the chip's control, was horrified by what he had almost done. Together, they fought their way through the Star Destroyer full of clones, still under Order 66's influence. They deliberately crashed the ship on a remote moon, then buried every clone who died, marking their graves with individual helmets planted in the ground. Before leaving, Ahsoka and Rex staged their own deaths, leaving evidence that suggested they had perished in the crash. This deception gave them freedom to operate without being actively hunted. They went their separate ways initially, each finding their own path through the dark times. Ahsoka would later take the name Fulcrum and help establish the Rebel Alliance. Rex would continue fighting for freedom, eventually joining the rebellion against the Empire he had once served. Caleb Doom survived because of Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch. These mutant clones had genetic variations that made them resistant to the inhibitor chip's control. When Order 66 activated, they did not turn on Caleb. Instead, they helped him escape, fighting against other clones who were trying to kill the young Padawan. His master, Dapa died protecting him, giving her life to buy time for her student to flee. Caleb took a new identity, becoming Kanan Jarrus. He spent years hiding, refusing to use his Force powers or acknowledge his Jedi heritage. But eventually, he would find purpose again, training his own apprentice and helping to ignite the rebellion that would eventually overthrow the Empire. His survival represented hope that even those who fled and hid might one day stand and fight again. Cal Kestis survived Order 66 through similar sacrifice. His master, Jaro Tapal, was killed protecting him from clone troopers on a Republic cruiser. Cal, traumatized by the experience and cut off from the Force by his fear and guilt, went into hiding on the junk world of Bracca. He worked as a scrapper, deliberately suppressing his abilities, trying to live as a normal person. But years later, circumstances would force him back into the fight to rediscover his powers and his purpose. Sari Junda, a Jedi Knight, survived along with her Padawan Trilla Sudure. They went into hiding together, protecting a group of younglings they had rescued. But eventually, they were betrayed and captured by the Empire. Under torture, Sari revealed where the younglings were hidden, a betrayal that haunted her. She escaped, but Trilla was broken by torture and converted into the second sister, one of the Inquisitors who hunted other Jedi survivors. The infant Grogu, later known to some as the Child, was rescued from the Jedi Temple during Order 66's execution by Jedi Master Kelleran Beck. Beck fought through clone troopers to reach the youngling's chambers, managing to extract at least one survivor. He brought Grogu away from Coruscant, ensuring the child's survival through one of the darkest days in Jedi history. Grogu would spend decades in hiding before eventually finding protection and purpose. Quinlan Vos, a Jedi Master who had been on a deep undercover mission during the Clone Wars, survived because he was not near any clone troopers when Order 66 executed. His isolation, which had sometimes been a burden during his mission, became his salvation. He remained hidden, helping other Jedi escape through an underground network that came to be called the Path. Jocasta Nu, the elderly Jedi librarian, survived the temple assault through her intimate knowledge of the facility's hidden passages. She escaped into Coruscant's underworld, carrying with her precious knowledge about Force-sensitive children across the galaxy. Her survival was temporary. She was later hunted down by the Grand Inquisitor, but she managed to preserve some knowledge before her death. Not all survivors remained loyal to the light. Some Jedi, broken by torture or tempted by offers of power, turned to the dark side and became Inquisitors. These fallen Jedi hunted their former comrades, using their knowledge of Jedi techniques and locations to track down survivors. The Inquisitorius became the Empire's primary weapon in the continued purge, and ironically, the greatest threat to surviving Jedi often came from other Jedi who had fallen. Each survivor carried trauma and guilt. Many had watched friends die, had been unable to save their Padawans or masters, had fled, while others fought hopeless last stands. They questioned their survival, wondered why the Force had spared them when so many worthier Jedi had died. Some lost faith entirely, convinced that the Force had abandoned them or that their understanding of the Force had been fundamentally flawed. But they survived, and in surviving, they kept alive the possibility of return. Luke Skywalker, raised in ignorance of his Jedi heritage, would eventually learn the truth and restart the Order. The survivors, through their choices and actions, ensured that Order 66, devastating as it was, would not achieve its ultimate goal of ending the Jedi forever. The Great Jedi Purge and aftermath, Order 66, was not the end of the Jedi's persecution. It was merely the opening move in what would become a 16-year campaign of systematic extermination. The Empire, under Emperor Palpatine's direction, launched the Great Jedi Purge, an organized effort to hunt down every surviving Jedi and eliminate them. This extended purge would continue until 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, when the last major Jedi hunting operations concluded. Darth Vader became the purge's primary instrument. The Emperor tasked his apprentice with hunting down Jedi survivors, a mission Vader pursued with relentless efficiency. His knowledge of the Jedi Order, his familiarity with their training and techniques, made him an ideal hunter. Vader knew how Jedi thought, where they might hide, what tactics they would use to evade capture. He turned that knowledge against his former comrades, tracking them to the galaxy's remotest corners. Vader's hunt took him to numerous worlds. On the river moon of Aldalim, he confronted Jedi Master Kirak in Philah, a warrior who had isolated himself from the Jedi Order to achieve perfect peace. Infila fought Vader to a standstill initially, the Jedi Master's skill nearly overwhelming the damaged Sith Lord, who was still adjusting to his cybernetic body. But Vader returned after recovering, defeated Infila, and took his lightsaber. This victory marked Vader's construction of his iconic red lightsaber, forged from a Jedi blade corrupted through dark side techniques. The Inquisitorius provided Vader with additional hunters. This organization consisted of former Jedi who had been turned to the dark side, either through torture, manipulation, or voluntary defection. Led by the Grand Inquisitor, a former Jedi Temple guard, these dark side adepts scoured the galaxy for survivors. They operated from Fortress Inquisitorius on the water moon of Nur, a facility designed specifically for interrogating and converting captured Jedi. The Inquisitors were identifiable by their distinctive weapons and appearance. They wielded double-bladed spinning lightsabers, weapons that emphasized intimidation over elegant combat. Their armor was black and red, designed to inspire fear. They abandoned their birth names, taking titles like Second Sister, Fifth Brother, Seventh Sister. This dehumanization was deliberate, stripping away their Jedi identities and replacing them with serial designations that emphasize their role as tools of the Empire. The Inquisitors were effective but flawed. Their training in the dark side was incomplete, their powers limited compared to true Sith Lords. Vader kept them deliberately weak, ensuring they could never threaten him or the Emperor. When Inquisitors failed their missions or showed signs of disloyalty, Vader eliminated them without hesitation. The organization experienced a high turnover, with new Inquisitors constantly being recruited to replace those who died in the field or were executed for failure. The Purge affected more than just surviving Jedi. Force-sensitive children became targets. The Empire hunted these youngsters, either eliminating them or conscripting them for Imperial service. The goal was to prevent new Jedi from ever arising. If no one trained in the Force's light side powers, if every Force-sensitive individual was either dead or working for the Empire, the Jedi would truly be extinct. Some Force-sensitive groups managed to survive by maintaining low profiles. The Guardians of the Whills on Yeta, for example, continued their spiritual practices, but did not identify as Jedi. They revered the Force but claimed no connection to the Fallen Order, allowing them to escape the worst of the Imperial persecution. Other Force traditions, like the Night Sisters of Dathomir or the Gensarai, survived through isolation or by presenting themselves as something other than Jedi. The Empire used propaganda to justify the Purge. They portrayed the Jedi as religious extremists who had manipulated the Republic for centuries, who had started the Clone Wars to seize power, who had attempted to murder the legitimately elected Chancellor when their coup failed. Most citizens, exhausted by war and desperate for stability, accepted these explanations. The Jedi became bogeymen in Imperial propaganda, cautionary tales about the dangers of religious fanaticism and unchecked power. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was repurposed as the Imperial Palace. Palpatine claimed it as his personal residence, a deliberate desecration of the Jedi's most sacred site. The temple's halls, which had echoed with meditation and learning for millennia, now served as the center of imperial governance. The Force itself seemed to dim in that place, the light side retreating from space so thoroughly corrupted by darkness. Other Jedi sites across the galaxy were similarly desecrated or destroyed. The Empire systematically erased evidence of the Order's existence. Libraries containing Jedi texts were burned, temples were demolished or converted to Imperial facilities. Statues honoring Jedi heroes were torn down. The goal was not merely to kill the Jedi, but to erase their legacy, to make it as if they had never existed. By approximately 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Great Jedi Purge had achieved its primary objectives. The Inquisitorius had hunted down most surviving Jedi. The Empire had secured or destroyed most Jedi artifacts and texts, and Force-sensitive children were being systematically eliminated or conscripted. The Inquisitors themselves vanished from active service, their mission largely complete. In the Empire's assessment, the Jedi Order was extinct. This belief would prove premature. Luke Skywalker, trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, would emerge as a new hope for the Jedi. His confrontation with Vader and the Emperor would lead to the Empire's downfall and the beginning of the Jedi's restoration. But those events lay years in the future. For 16 years, the galaxy knew only the Empire's darkness, and the Jedi were remembered primarily as traitors and failures. The trauma of Order 66 and the subsequent purge affected the galaxy in ways beyond the immediate death toll. Trust was broken on a fundamental level. The clones, who had been created as loyal soldiers, had proven that loyalty could be overridden by hidden programming. The Republic, which had stood for 1,000 generations, had transformed into tyranny in a single day. The Jedi, who had been guardians and mediators for 25,000 years, had been eliminated by those they trusted most. The lesson people learned was that nothing was certain, that anyone could be betrayed, that institutions which seemed eternal could fall in moments. This trauma would shape galactic politics and culture for generations. Even after the Empire's fall, the memory of Order 66 remained a cautionary tale about the dangers of concentrated power and the fragility of democracy. For the clone troopers who executed Order 66, the aftermath varied. Most continued serving the Empire, believing they had done their duty by stopping the Jedi coup. The inhibitor chips remained active, preventing them from questioning or regretting what they had done. Over time, the Empire phased out the clones, replacing them with recruited stormtroopers who were cheaper to train and maintain. The clones were gradually retired, discarded by the Empire they had helped create. A few clones, like Rex, Gregor, and Wolf, had their inhibitor chips removed and regained their free will. These clones had to live with the horror of what they had almost done, the knowledge that they had been used as weapons against people they cared about. The psychological burden was immense. Some found purpose in rebellion, fighting against the Empire to atone for their role in its creation. Others simply tried to survive, haunted by memories of friends they had turned on while helpless to resist. The broader legacy of Order 66 was that it succeeded almost completely. The Sith achieved their revenge against the Jedi. The Democratic Republic became an authoritarian empire. Palpatine ruled a galaxy with absolute power opposed by only scattered resistance. The dark side dominated, with the light side reduced to embers hidden in remote corners of space. For a generation, it seemed the Sith had won permanently, that the Jedi were truly gone forever, but the Force works in mysterious ways. Even in the darkest times, hope persists. The survivors of Order 66 scattered and hunted though they were, kept alive the possibility of return. And when Luke Skywalker finally emerged and chose to throw down his lightsaber rather than strike his father in anger, when Anakin Skywalker redeemed himself by destroying the Emperor and saving his son, the wheel turned. The Jedi would return because the Force ultimately seeks balance. Order 66 was the Sith's greatest triumph, but it would not be their final victory. The story that began with Sifo-Dyas' vision and ended with the Empire's rise would eventually give way to a new story, one of redemption and restoration. The timeline of Order 66 is a tragedy, but it is not the end of the story. It is merely one chapter in the eternal conflict between light and darkness, a chapter that reminds us how quickly trust can be betrayed, how completely institutions can fall, and how important it is to remain vigilant against the corruption of power. The Jedi Order would rise again, but they would never forget the day they fell, the moment when millions of loyal soldiers turned their weapons on their generals, the betrayal encoded in organic circuits and activated by three simple words: execute Order 66. And so, we reach the end of this comprehensive timeline, having traced Order 66 from its origins in a worried Jedi's vision to its execution across 1,000 battlefields, to its aftermath in the dark years of Imperial rule. This was not merely a military operation or a tragic accident. It was the culmination of the Sith's patient revenge, a scheme that required decades to prepare and only moments to execute. The story of Order 66 reminds us that the greatest betrayals often come from those we trust most completely. The clone troopers were not villains. They were victims of programming they never chose, forced to murder friends while helpless to resist. The Jedi were not failures. They were guardians who trusted in the wrong people, who believed that loyalty freely given could never be taken away by force. And the galaxy itself learned that democracy is fragile, that freedom requires constant vigilance, that darkness can triumph when good people are caught unprepared. Yet even in this darkest chapter, there is hope. The survivors, though few, kept the light alive. They preserved knowledge, protected the innocent where they could, and waited for the day when balance might be restored. Their patience and sacrifice would eventually be rewarded when a new generation rose to challenge the Empire and revive the Jedi Order. The timeline of Order 66 is complete, but its lessons echo through the ages. Trust carefully. Question authority. Remember that even the mightiest institutions can fall. And never forget that in the darkest times, a single ember of light can start a fire that burns away the darkness. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of Star Wars history's most devastating moments. If you enjoyed this comprehensive exploration of Order 66, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth looks at the lore of the galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you always.